everyone can see us. I want to give it a minute or two to show up in Facebook feeds and join us. Yep, and there we are. I can see us on the page. Wonderful. All right. Oh, good. And we already have a few watchers. So welcome everyone who is tuning in so far for my weekly Thursday Facebook Live chat. I'm going to introduce this week's guest in just a minute. So grab a drink, grab your lunch if you want. Are you near, I'm sorry, Deb, did I even ask you, are you near Seattle? Or I just assume everyone?
No, I live in Colorado. I work out of Seattle, but I live in Colorado.
Ah.
So I'm on Mountain Time, not Pacific. Yeah,
okay.
It's quite confusing in this gig economy, isn't it? Yes, I work for the University of Washington, but I live in Colorado.
Okay. All right. I just saw your signature, exactly. University of Washington and everything, so I just assumed you were there.
Absolutely. No, and there's no reason not to assume that. It's just that's my work email address. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I head out there a number of times a year, but not home.
And not lately.
Not lately. Not at all lately. Absolutely.
So, all right. Well, if you're just joining us, I'm going to let our guest introduce herself in just a minute. Welcome. If you're new here, of course, I'm Lisa from A Day in Our Shoes. Been offering a lot of guests that were we tailored our talks specifically to the pandemic and distance learning and the shutdown and things like that. Today, we're going to switch gears a little bit because talking about the pandemic, you can only take so much of that before you need a break. Also because in addition to just liking her book, which she's going to tell you about in a minute, but liking the content of the book, liking the focus of the book, I felt it was really relevant to now because, again, I want to reiterate to parents that for all the negatives about what's going on right now, one of the positives is that probably for the only time in your child's life, we have like 100% control over their environment. And we have yes, they're with us all day, every day, and that's good and bad. But again, we have 100% control over the challenges that are, the tasks that are given to our kids, the challenges that are given to our kids, what skills we see, what opportunities they are presented with, what feedback they are presented with. And that can be overwhelming. Like when you think about it, like, oh my God, I'm responsible for all of that right now. But again, we can turn that into a positive in that we can really see what our kids can do when presented with certain challenges. So let me introduce to you Deborah Winking, and she can tell you a little bit about why she's here and what she's done and what she does in life, both personally and professionally. Go ahead, Deb.
Hey, thanks so much, Lisa. I can't tell you, we did not plan this, but that could not have been a better segue. I 100% agree with you. And actually, what you said leads right into what I wrote and why I wrote, and has to do with parental influence on our children. We are the most influential people in our kids' lives. And so what we do matters. So that's kind of behind what I wrote. I work for the University of Washington Center for Educational Leadership a lot in general ed right now. I started out my career in special education, working at the New England Center for Autism. Loved teaching kids on the spectrum. That was has been my passion for many years. And then I found myself the parent of a son with a rare genetic syndrome. So throughout all of that, I sort of found myself on the other side of the desk, if you will, after being a parent, being a teacher, and saying some things that were right and some pretty things I'm not too proud of to parents over many, many years, where I was completely naive to what parents were facing, and then to be that parent has given me a different perspective.
Yeah.
So after, and the reason I went into special ed, or the reason I went into special ed was based on a long held belief. I was 13 when I was asked to work with kids with special needs in our church basement, because then this was just around 76, 77, and kids weren't even welcome in our schools. And I realized that, first of all, I learned a lot more from them than they learned from me. And one of the things I learned was those kids I worked with, which were my age and older at the time, were a lot more capable than our communities, our schools, and sometimes our even our parents wanted to believe. And so that kind of followed me into education. And as I worked with kids with autism, I found that unfair testing practices, low expectations, and just beliefs about what kids could do sold my kids short over and over again. And so then I went back and got a PhD in educational testing to really kind of understand, what does it mean when we say a kid has this diagnosis or this label, and what doesn't it mean? What does a label tell us, and what does a label sell short? And so, with all that behind me, then as a parent of my own child, I really long believed that our beliefs and behaviors as the most influential people in our kids' lives could impact our kids' performance. But I didn't really have an opportunity to test that out until I had a kid of my own, and I saw, hey, what I do matters. The messages I send matter. And so that's kind of the background for my writing of Capable, is sort of my story of 20 years of trying to send my kid the messages that I wanted him to get, which takes us full circle to your lead in, which was the notion about how we have some control about the environment our kids are in, and the message they're getting from it right now in this time of COVID. So that's that.
Okay. So for those of you who are watching right now, if you have a question for Deb as we're going along, go ahead and put it on the comments and we will see it here on our screen. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your child? And I always feel a kinship with those who have kids or who are in the rare disease world, because I'm in the rare disease world myself, and my family is. But tell us a little bit about your son's story or your family's story, and then how you got to the book.
Yeah, right. Well, my son was born with a rare genetic condition called Soto syndrome, and it presents with low hypotonia, low muscle tone in every muscle of the body. So it affects eating, drinking, standing, moving, being able to squeeze, everything. So there's a whole collection of conditions present with that: learning problems, tumors, etc. But the real big definer of Soto's is it's an overgrowth syndrome, where fast growing cells cause tumors, cause the hypotonia, cause the learning problems, that entire piece. And my son also as a secondary condition, and this is not even considered in the world of special needs, but developed a classic stutter when he was able to begin having enough tone in his mouth to speak clearly. He developed a classic stutter. So that he's carried with him too, which is outside the realm of special needs, but I see the same kind of prejudice and kind of labeling as less than, making it in our minds saying, hey, I know what this kid can do because of how he speaks. So that's kind of where he started out. He was labeled at about 16 months. I didn't believe it because he had seen so many specialists. He's a twin, seen so many specialists. I said, if this kid had a syndrome, it would have been found, but in fact it wasn't, and it was confirmed, and he was followed by geneticists, etc. from then 16 months on. But I will tell you, and I know because all the students I worked with when I worked with my students with autism were all had very severe challenges. Most of them nonverbal. Most of them had severe injurious behaviors. And I will tell you that my son is not. I can tell you, my son is not on that end of the spectrum. I maintained a goal for him that I wanted him to learn alongside and compete with kids without special needs. And that was just my choice. It's not a choice for everybody. And it's not even, doesn't need to be, it is not the right choice, but it was what I wanted. And so by sixth grade, through a lot of work and working alongside the specialists, the army of folks that we have working with us when our kids are on an IEP, we were able to get him out of special ed. So he continued in the school system after sixth grade in general education. So that I credit my son for. He really, really did a lot through OT, PT, speech, with his special ed teacher and case manager to actually get to the point where we were able to exit special ed. So and I maintained that he would do everything his twin sister did since he was, that 16 months old, where he was not standing, moving, walking, and she was running. And so that was kind of my mantra and how I sought to raise him. And today, I would say that even though he still attracts a lot of prejudice, a lot of people underestimating him. He is now at the University of Wyoming and pursuing college. So
exciting.
Yeah, it is. It's wonderful, and it's it's a story of resilience and perseverance on his part to get where he is.
Great. All right, so then tell us about the book. What's the central theme? Tell us, about it. And
Yeah. So I just started out because I had written a lot academically, as an educator. And every time I sat down to write something, I thought, what new do I have to offer? I don't have anything new to offer. I'd start a concept for an article or an article in education. I thought, you know what? I don't have anything really to add there. But when I started working on this, I thought, no, you have something to say. And I felt really strongly about it because I saw over and over again that the environment I set up for my kid, the messages that I sent him made a difference. And so I just wanted to share it. And that is really it. I feel that parental beliefs and behaviors parental beliefs as manifested in the behaviors that we then act out toward our kids make a difference. And I think there's, and I talk in the book through chat, there's a lot of, I will tell you, I wrote as it's at the intersection of prescriptive nonfiction and memoir. So there's a lot of humor and humility in it. I talk about a lot of mistakes I made. And but what I do more than anything is try to give parents a visceral sense of what it felt like to parent as I was parenting, and hopefully inspire other folks to parent intentionally and courageously. I made a ton of mistakes, but parent intentionally and courageously to send their kid the all important message that he or she is capable. And I think it really does make a difference, and it made a difference in my kid's life. And I hope the message people get from this is, hey, she did this with her kid, and it made a difference for her child, and maybe it could make a difference for me and my child as well.
Right. Can you give what are a couple of specifics of when you talk about sending that message that a parent might be inherently doing that they don't realize they're doing that's bad, or things that they can turn, how they maybe present information to send the message that a child's capable?
Yes. So I can say it happens over and over every day, subtly and not so subtly. When we say, oh, Izzy can pick that up, but Gabe probably can't. Or don't give him that, he can't do that. Or, for example, I have other friends who have one-on-one aides, and they'll say, oh, Jorge misbehaved today, and it was because he didn't have his one-on-one. Those kinds of messages, those things we say, even if we say them within earshot of our child hears that and says, oh, the person who I believe in the most, my parent, thinks I can't do that, or thinks that I may do less than a good job when I'm not with my typical one-on-one, or isn't sure I can pick this up, be able to make it through an entire scouting meeting, doesn't think I can do that problem or do that page of problems. When they say, I probably can't. And it's as simple and as profound as that. And I start out the book with it, and it's funny and true. Started the book with a simple illustration from science and from basic science and what we've learned throughout the years and how it plays out with people. And I start out with the case of rats, and it's true in rats, and it's true in people that what we think affects how we behave, and how we behave affects others. I talked too about stories of other folks in the book that inspired me, and I don't know if are you familiar with Daniel Kish?
No.
If I can take just a minute, it's fascinating, and you can look him up on the podcast Batman on NPR. And he's a boy who was born blind, went blind in the first, I think, year of his life.
Okay. Now I heard. Now that you say the story.
Yeah. Anyway, the point is, he liked to climb. His mother let him climb. He wanted to get on a bike. His mother let him get on a bike. And before, with a lot of missteps and a lot of accidents along the way, it turned out that Daniel Kish was the blind boy who was navigating the streets of his town on a bicycle, and the blind boy that was leading sighted people through the through forests. And so we make the point that, hey, certainly we can't change a genetic diagnosis. We can't cure bone, ligament, and tendon if your child has a spinal cord severed. Certain things we can't change, but we can move the line of what is possible by believing in our kids. And there's countless stories of that. And so I make the point in the book, and I guess I want to be clear about this. I'd never talk in the book about, as some folks have, parent advocates have, of curing my child, because I haven't. And I think curing misses the point, because we love our children for all of their uniqueness, all of their idiosyncrasies and beauty. And also we want them to live their best lives. So I'm not saying that, the folks in the deaf community, for example, that say, you know what, it's not our problem, it's the hearing community's problem. I'm not saying it's that inherently because we think differently because we're autistic, or we communicate differently because we're deaf, or whatever it is, that we're wrong. But we also at the same time want our children to live their best lives. And so in living our best lives, we can have expectations that we can set an expectation for our child and set the conditions for that and move the child toward whatever that expectation is. And I'm not saying that expectation for everyone is the same, just because for my kid, it was, hey, he's going to do everything his twin sister did. That's one example. I have plenty of friends and plenty of people I counsel who say, hey, my goal for my child is to be in a classroom of kids who are speaking, and my child's nonverbal. That's your goal. That's your goal. But whatever you see as that expectation for your child, I talk about focusing on the next 15 yards to get to that goal. And that, in fact, going back to the research in grit and mindset, Angela Duckworth and Carol Dweck, that we can move the line of what's possible by actually setting our kids consistent messages that they're capable.
Okay, so then how do you, and Stacy, I'll get to your question in a second, but I want to skip down to, is it Fiona? I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce that. Her question, because her question was kind of the question that was going through my head when she said, do you keep your son's standards at the level of his age group, or do you lower them? And I don't like the word lower, but I know what you mean, readjust to what's appropriate. But I would say, using the bike riding example, my child is 13 and cannot ride a bike.
Uh-huh.
So in my head, I go through conflicting messages because part of me says he cannot ride a bike yet, right? Yeah, which means, it might be 20 or it might be 25. But then the other piece of that is a person's entire self-worth doesn't necessarily depend upon riding a bike. And if he never learns to ride a bike, that's okay and that's acceptable. So how do you mesh those two kind of thought processes, or how do you know, as Fiona's asking, how do you know where to aim?
Yeah, I love that question, Fiona, and I love what you've added to it, Lisa, because you're right. First of all, I make the point in the book that as a parent, you know your child better than anyone. You know them, and don't let people tell you don't because of a diagnosis or a label. So and I feel like as a parent, we get when we're not being led by our fear, when we're not being driven by our own fear, we have a gut sense of where that should be. And you're absolutely right. There are things with my son that he was never going to learn to do. I mean, for a while, it was being able to blow out candles on a birthday cake. And we can't, that can't be the source of a person's worth. You're absolutely right. So what I've had to do was hold two ideas sacred at the same time. And this sounds, see if this helps at all, but a steely-eyed recognition of exactly where they are. It's not being in denial. It's like, that's where he's at. And I talk about it a lot in the book. Wow, he can't walk without falling over. His balance doesn't play out anywhere. He has no endurance. He can't do anything for very long. Kids walk away from him. He can't hold a conversation. All these things. That's the now. That's current. And that hurts. Like, that's killing you as a parent. And at the same time, you need to hold on to what could be. And so holding on to both of those, then you can look at those next 15 yards. So here's an example to go to Fiona's point. Okay, I know what he can do now, but I had an idea in my mind of what I wanted for him. And so I would just look at what's next. And a lot of that next 15 yards, it wasn't to be there. It wasn't to be at the place where he's enrolled in the University of Wyoming. It was, okay, he's going to be able to need to walk with his hands in his pockets instead of out in front of him like a Frankenstein, because that's all he could do to balance. And I don't say that in jest, and that is not an insult to anybody, but I had plenty of people in the community calling my child Frankenstein boy because he walked like this as an 8 and 9-year-old. So I think you have to hold on to what is and then have your goal and see what's close to that. And I did a lot of work of shaping behavior as a teacher of kids with special needs. So what was close to that was being able to get those hands in the pockets so that he was able to stand up without having his hands in front of him. Then it was the next space, and then it was the next space. So back to Fiona, I would say that you will know, you should set your goal for your child as to what you think where you'd like him to be. And then look at that next 15 yards. That may mean lower than his age level. That may mean well lower than his age level, but your ultimate goal may be closer to his age level. I can give you one more example on that if you'd like, Lisa. When my son was in second grade, they said, he will never write. And again, my son's older than you all, so you all with young kids will have a different assistive technology. They said, we're going to give him an Alpha Smart. He will never write. And that didn't match with the goal I had for my son. I wanted him to be able to print. I had a vision that someday he'd leave a note on the refrigerator for a roommate, or maybe, God forbid, a girlfriend, that he would someday sign a paycheck. That now, even though we don't use writing a lot these days, I wanted him to be able to do that, because what happens when you can't do those things? And so I had an idea, he will write. And so when they kept pushing the Alpha Smart, it didn't match my goal. And so I said, no, I will not take the Alpha Smart. You can use the Alpha Smart as a reinforcer for him to type spelling words after he hand prints them, but I will not just take the Alpha Smart, because I knew that would close the door for my child. And if we said yes to the Alpha Smart, even though that might be more comfortable, safer, and easier in the short run, I knew it would close a door to a long-term goal. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think that helps answer, Stacy and Jennifer's questions about some of the struggles their kids are having. I think you need to, Stacy in particular. I think Stacy, she's only looking at the end goal, and I think you need to back up a little bit. Not every IEP has objectives underneath goals. That doesn't mean that you can't necessarily create them within your home life or within, homework life. And of course, once things, get back to normal, get those added in, but kind of break it down into chunks. So just like we chunk down work for our kids, you have to kind of chunk down that end goal. So if he's easily overwhelmed with the end result of a finished assignment, I think break that down.
And to Stacy's point of it as well, I did not write a book about this child, but one of my other children has attachment disorder. And so I understand the PTSD you're talking about there, Stacy. And I also 100% agree with Lisa. If there's however you can do it to make sure those needs are met. I had to have food, snacks in front of my kid all the time, so that he always knew that he had what he needed in front of him, and to kind of even partition off and shorten those assignments. And guess what? Over time, the goal is you'll lengthen them. You can move to your goal, but as Lisa said, not immediately.
Right. And I mean, and ask him what's overwhelming him, and, just kind of start chipping away at what, mini goals and things. We just discussed this yesterday, actually, with, I had an OT on, and we just didn't do Thursdays because on Thursdays she provides services virtually to a lot of her clients. Yeah. But we talked about kids getting overwhelmed and just controlling what you can control first, which is the home environment, and a comfortable workspace and a distraction-free work zone. So I don't want to get too far off topic with distance learning and IEPs. But yeah, I would say break it down, as she said, and that 15-yard piece. What can you achieve, to get you to that next level?
And then celebrate. That was one of the things I talk about in the book too. Is once you do those small increments, take the time to celebrate.
Yeah.
Because I think it can get really tense right now, and even doing that small piece is going to shape behavior for the future. And don't think, oh wait, I can't quit to celebrate for a second with my kid. He's got to keep at it. Take that time to celebrate.
Great. Let's see where we are. So we talked, sorry, I lost my spot on my notes of
That's
things
okay.
we're going to talk about today.
We I wonder if I wonder if we want to say a word about the role of challenge in our kids' lives and leveraging natural curiosity. Is that something that might be helpful?
That, and I think we just had a new question pop up, which I think is great because that was on our list, or something that I wanted to talk about, and that's Keisha's question, and I'll read it. Sometimes in those meetings, I feel like they look at me sideways because I have high expectations and know what he is capable of, and I feel like the label lowers those expectations. So yes, I mean, as a parent to a child who has intellectual disabilities, I can tell you, because that's the big one, I think. I mean, I'm not trying to invalidate Keisha's concerns, and I have no idea, Keisha, what your child's diagnoses are, and I'm not asking. But I trust me, I know what it's like to sit in those meetings, and when you have a child who's nonverbal and intellectually disabled, the bar is really low. So what's your advice for those situations?
Yeah, Keisha, I feel you because so initially my son was placed in a multiply handicapped preschool class with with all kids who were on standing boards, kids who had very severe needs, and he was in that class, and he was with. That's where he was diagnosed and placed. That's where he performed at that time, and that's fair. That's where they placed him. But I felt like he could do more, and I agree with you. I went in to be aware of what was going to get to know the classroom environment. I pretended to be, and I actually was, stapling bees to the bulletin board so I could see what life was like in that classroom. But I realized that that most of the time in the classroom, kids were waiting to be served up activities and weren't allowed to take initiative. And we could do a whole nother Facebook Live on evaluating the environments that your kids are in and whether or not they're environments that invite challenge at whatever level that your child is, at whatever level your child is, or whether kids are being doing a lot of waiting to be served up activities. And I think whether your kid has a very severe need or a mild need, we always have to keep our kids on their learning edge, whatever it is. And so in my case, I know when I finally asked to have more challenge for my child and asked for him to be placed in a different classroom, they looked at me like I was crazy, and also said, when they had me exit that classroom for another classroom, they said, "Don't worry, we will write the paperwork." I think this was preschool. I said, I just want him out of here right now, and I want him someplace else. And she said, "We'll write the paperwork in such a way that you can get back in if you find out that you've made a bad mistake." And I thought, thanks. But at that point, I was ready to take my chances out on the road because I felt that the level of challenge I could give him myself was higher than what he was getting in that classroom. Now, that's not always the case. And I have to tell you, as a special needs teacher, as a teacher with kids with autism, 90% of our teachers are trying to challenge those kids every day. But you can find a mismatch in the environment your kid's placed in, and that's okay to do. And I have to tell you, I feel kinship with you, Keisha. I felt like my kid's label lowered expectations for him. And I wanted that label way behind. I wanted them to see my son, and I didn't want that label forward. And that was my fear. And that's why matter of fact, it's written in the book. If you read it, I read it. We talked to him about having, because there was he was in 4 different kinds of therapy and everything, and in special ed, but we talked about him having a muscle weakness condition. We didn't even use the word syndrome until he was 16, because I knew that the word syndrome would conjure up notions that I didn't want him to have to deal with. And that's every parent's decision, but I certainly wanted that label to recede well into the background, because I felt even just the label sent messages.
Right. And if for those of you, this has come up in a couple of podcasts and Facebook Lives that I've done, and I have it on my site, and it's come up. Yeah, it comes up often. And the person, I don't know if you've ever heard her speak, she's an inclusion person. Her name's Darcy Elks, and she's someone who turned me onto this concept 10 years ago. And again, I have a free printable PDF workbook on the blog. Just look for a vision statement. And of course, self-determination is always the goal. So you want to encourage your child, have your child participate in this exercise to the maximum extent possible. What that's going to look like is going to vary, obviously based on the child and their age and everything else. But she told me this story and it was at a workshop, that her daughter has Down syndrome. Mm-hmm. And her high school team, while they were okay, they had this vision of her daughter was going to then go on to a sheltered workshop. And that was the team's vision for this child or this student. But the parent had a different vision, and so did the student, and that was supported living with a part-time employment. And in fact, at the time, this young lady was already working at a local retail store. So really, as far as her ultimate goal of supported living and part-time employment, she had already achieved half of it. And she just was not even old enough to achieve the other half. She was still in high school. But you have to have the same vision. And if the vision isn't the same with your team, I say the IEP is your roadmap, and that's the team's job, is to develop this roadmap. So how do you develop a roadmap if you don't know where you're going? And that's why you need to sit down with your family. And now is a great time, since we're all stuck together, but to work on that vision together. And again, for every child, it's going to look different. For some, it's going to be college. And if it doesn't include college, that's fine too. Right. We're talking about vocational training or part-time employment or, whatever it is.
Lisa, what you said about the vision. So I told you, and Keisha, based on your question, I offered the story of preschool, but then going through elementary and special ed, by 6th grade, that notion of having a common vision and working with your team to get the only reason, and I will say this with complete humility, the only reason that my son exited special ed, because 0.4% of kids who enter into special ed for non-speech reasons ever get out. So the reason he got out had to do with walking alongside and having a common vision, as you said, with that team. So I got to the point with his case manager where everyone knew the goal was for him to exit. And so each IEP objective, if it was on there, we made sure there was kind of a maintenance piece of that so that he was moving out. So, he was teachers were writing his work for him, because he voiced it and they wrote it. And I knew he would never get out doing that. Teachers were going after he wrote short responses and correcting his letters so that the general ed teacher could read it. There were many supports were in place. And so by walking alongside that team, we were able to come up with a maintenance goal where he was phasing out of having other people write his work. He was phasing out of having teachers go in and correct. He was phasing out of having shorter assignments. He was phasing out of having someone constantly checking his work and making sure he turned stuff in before it went to the teacher, so that when it came time to actually exit, Gabe was a really big part of that meeting, was also understood that there ain't no free lunch after that, that what life would be like with no support, because otherwise that's a drop-off point that most kids can't do. So I would second what you said, Lisa, about making sure you have a common vision with your team, and so that everybody's on the same boat. Because if your expectation is this, and your team, I mean, he was in 6th grade, and your team's expectation is that he's just doing fine where he is, then you're always going to butt heads.
Right. And for those who kind of over the years, I've had kind of a lot of parents kind of poo-poo the idea of sitting down to do a vision statement, because it seems so formal, right? To sit down as a family and say, what is our vision? But it's important to note that if you don't create a vision for your child, someone else will. So, if you want to, again, it's up to us to create the vision, because if we don't do it, someone else will. All right, let's move on to Emma. How do we respond if a special ed coordinator is telling us that having something written into an IEP will trap my child, both me and my child? I think if you want to talk about IEP specifically, I think that, if our child, all our kids, if they lack skill sets, you either have to teach the skill or you have to accommodate for them not having the skill. And you can, of course, accommodate for the lack of the skill while you're teaching the skill.
Here she wrote that again.
But
she wrote a little more.
Oh, she did?
Yes, both me and she explained a little, Emma explained a little more.
Oh, okay, I see it now. Child, he needs frequent movement breaks.
Okay, and I requested that be written into his IEP.
Sorry, I requested that be written into his. Yeah, I don't ever believe that that a child should have to earn sensory breaks, because the day that he needs the breaks the most is the day that he's least likely to earn them. Right. So that just makes no sense. And as with anything, ask for it in writing and follow up with a PWN.
I think so too. I think that in this case, those movement breaks are part of getting your child to that next level. And so to leave that up to chance, because go back to your original setup through this morning, Lisa, we don't always have control of our kids' environment. And if that's not written in and you're not in the picture, you don't know that that's happening. So in that case, I would fall away from that special ed coordinator and say how important that is to have assurance of, so that
and I would say anytime, for me, it's a red flag anytime a school gives you the, well, we have to do this, because there aren't a whole lot of have tos in IEPs. And I have found, when it comes down to it, schools can do anything when it comes to IEPs. If they want to offer it and put it in there and do it, they can. And I've seen a lot of really great creative things happen over the years. It's not, I don't mean that to be as a negative thing. So when they kind of threaten you with you're going to get trapped, or we have to do this, that to me is a red flag. And because there are no have tos, IEPs are living, fluid documents that can be changed at any time.
Absolutely.
So, and at any time, if your child develops coping mechanisms where he doesn't need sensory breaks, you take him out of the IEP. It's not. So, all right, so let's move on to Carol Ann. Daughter has Down syndrome, and therefore her label is very visible. Don't we know that? Once we went into JH, what's JH? Oh, junior high. Junior high late, and the secretary assumed her teacher was the life skills. Of course, don't you know? All kids with Down syndrome.
Must be.
Yeah, all kids with Down syndrome go to life skills. No one told you. So my daughter said, no, I have social studies. So the general public also contributes to this.
I have to tell you, my son's disability is visible as well. And so I completely understand. Carol Ann, my heart goes out to you, because I describe in the book so many situations where he's judged based on appearance.
And mine was a helmet. So
there you go. There you go. Yeah. And so the general public will contribute to that. But that's one thing I had to teach my kid. It sounds like your daughter. You go, girl, whatever your daughter's name is, because she advocated for herself and said, no, I'm in social studies. I don't know what you're thinking, but I'm in social studies. And that's kind of what I had to teach my kid, is that people will continue to underestimate you, and it's your job to keep proving them wrong. And there are a number of stories in the book about, how he is underestimated over and over again. And I said, you just have to keep getting back in there and showing them who you are, because remember, by junior high, we don't get to control everything anymore, and certainly in high school or in college. And so I realized he was going to be around people who were going to lower expectations for him, say he can't, keep him on the outside, and that he was going to have to be the one to self-advocate for that, because I couldn't be standing over him. So whatever you've taught your daughter so far, speak up, is exactly right. And the honest answer is, you're going to have to keep teaching her to do that, because my son has had an experience of it this past year, even as a college student. He was in a summer internship, and one of the women who helped him who served as a reference for this internship, said to me, well, she hadn't really talked to him. She wrote this recommendation, but hadn't talked to him. And later met him in this internship and said, Gabe misrepresented himself in the application. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, if you do is look at him, you know something's wrong with him. How would you like to hear that about your kid? So those kinds of things will continue to happen, and your child will unfortunately be responsible for schooling the whole world.
Yeah.
And good for her.
Yeah. I thought I had something. I just derailed my own train of thought. Oh no, that's fine. Oh, I know what it was. And if you look, and it's just something I noticed this year. If you buy Girl Scout cookies, and I don't think it's Girl Scout cookie time anymore. I noticed as I was eating an entire package myself, that if you look on the side of the package, it says like what your money goes to, and it says that the Girl Scouts, that the money raised by cookies goes to teach girls valuable life skills. And I thought, what a nice change, that the word life skills doesn't have to be a bad, like, we all need life skills, right? I don't know, or somehow it got this negative thing thrown onto it, that you are less than, or and I get it, because my kid is in an entire life skills program himself, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. But thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Was that okay? On to Stacy again. What if, and I love this question because it's, what if the school has high expectations and this is causing the child to shut down? Oh, are you there,
Stacy?
Can you see me?
Are you talking about me?
Yeah, sorry, it just disappeared for a second. Okay, no, my screen just went black for like a second.
Oh my goodness.
And I'll let you elaborate on this, but I would say that it's not the high expectations that are causing your child to shut down. It's the either lack of supports, lack of interventions. It's either the wrong supports, wrong interventions. It's not the high expectations necessarily. If those expectations are reasonable, it's the lack of, like I said, supports to get there.
Support around them. Yeah, I would completely agree. And Stacy, I'd love to hear more about what's going on. I invite you to, we'll tell you at the end, my Facebook and my email and my website, because I'd like to hear more about that. But I will say again, it isn't what we've learned over and over again. If we set our expectations high, kids will move toward them. That's general ed, that's regular ed, that's everybody. But to Lisa's point, if the supports aren't built around that, that's where the frustration is. And I'd like to hear more about who's around your child, who are the significant adults in that school who are influencing your child. There could be a whole myriad of things. And I'm wondering if my guess is it's less the expectations than all those pieces around your child. And I'd love to hear more of your story, because I don't think we can diagnose it here, but other than to say, it's not the expectations themselves.
If the expectations are reasonable, and that as a parent, I mean, there are, I'm not going to be, my other son told me not too long ago that I'm too old to be an NFL running back. because, that's the only thing holding me back from an NFL career is my age. But, you know, but,
I like
yeah,
that.
you can't, if you put the expectation on me to be an NFL running back, that's not a reasonable expectation. But it could be the supports and services as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So Shannon wants to talk about exiting and having a one-on-one para. I love this conversation. I do, because yeah.
Yeah. So she said, yes, we plan to exit. Yeah, I will say I worked with kids for many years with significant challenges, and that the notion that our kid needs that same one-on-one person can be very debilitating. And the reason is because we learn and our kids teach us then in subtle ways that by only performing for that person, that's all they'll do. And then we come to think, oh, they need to be with that person. And the fact is probably what they need right then is a little less. I mean, maybe when they're with that one-on-one is meeting all their needs and responding right away, and is maybe there's less tantrums, maybe there's less embarrassing situations. I know this happened with my son where food is dribbling down his throat or hands are in his mouth or whatever. Maybe it's less embarrassing, but in the long run, that dogged kind of connection to a single one-on-one person actually shortcuts. I will argue all day long that shortcuts a lot of skills and behaviors that kids need to at least try on. I'm not saying there's no need for a one-on-one ever. I know there is. I've worked with dozens of kids that there is. But the idea of getting our children to be flexible to who they're working with, doesn't have to be the same person, and gradually, and having the ultimate goal of always moving beyond that one-on-one has to be there, or that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. And I would say I'm a huge fan of getting everything defined in your IEP, including your aide or para, whatever you're referring to her as, her duties and responsibilities. So I think you're just going to have to look at each one at a time and say, what is she doing for this child? Should she be doing that for the child? Can the child do that on their own? And how can we begin to fade that skill? And kind of like, of course, in a able-bodied adult with more life experience and more life skills, their skill set is here and your child's is here.
Right.
So you need to start to get them to match, and enabling your child to do, again, pick apart each skill one at a time and say, what is she doing for him and how can we get my child there, and begin to fade her. And again, either accommodating for the skills or teaching them the skills. Andrea, my child needs both life skills and modified grade level instruction. How can I get the school to pivot?
That's
a great one, because we just want to put kids in one bucket or the other, don't we?
Right.
No, God forbid somebody be half of each or both. We can't have that. You have to be either in life skills or gen ed. There's no in between.
I have stories in the book about that too with my own child, and I have to say that oftentimes when you get a label, and push back, Lisa, if you disagree, but sometimes with some school districts, especially if they're wealthier, you'll get a suite of services comes with your label. Here, you get all these things. It's almost like the bundled cable. I don't know if I need ESPN, the Ocho. I don't know if just because all those services are offered to me, doesn't necessarily mean those are the best thing for my kids. And so I hear that in your question, and Andrea, that hey, just because they have a high need in one area and a low need in another area, or a very different kind of need in another area, doesn't mean we take that whole package. And that means looking at each area separately and saying, this is what will give my child maximum independence in this area, maybe English language arts, but in mathematics, this is the kind of instruction I need. And you're right. And I think the only way to do that, again, is by, and I say this, it sounds like a euphemism or a platitude, but walking alongside with the key people on your IEP team to explain that he needs this here and he needs this here. And I find by butting heads with folks, I rarely got what I wanted. But by being able to make that point, look, this is what he can do here, and this is what he can do here, that I got more of what I needed. So I can't tell from your short question. I'd love to hear more from you too. Um, where the areas where the life skills were important and where the real high verbal comprehension was. I'd love to hear, because your child sounds fascinating, because I've worked with kids who had extremely high oral comprehension, but yet were really low in other areas. So I don't know quite what your son's issue is, but certainly it's disentangling exactly what your kid needs from that kind of overarching, hey, every kid with this label gets these things, because it's not a one size fits all.
Right. And I think also some of our kids have so many needs that you do have to prioritize. And, all of my child's needs and educational needs, life skills cannot be addressed. In normal times, he's programmed every day from 8 to 5:30. And that is literally a full-time job. And there's still things that we don't get to. So I think that you have to just make some choices. And for me, what I've passed on at this point is inclusion, and that he is in a very small setting, a very restrictive setting. And the reason being so that he can focus as much time as we need to on what he needs to learn. And inclusion we do on our own time with his brothers, with his brother and family and our neighborhood and things like that. And that's where, I make sure that he gets included in our community, but just not during his school day.
Hey, absolutely. Hey, Lisa, down at the end, Andrea, I want to get the other question too, but Andrea clarified. He said he understands. I love your kid already, Andrea. He understands geopolitics, but can't tell time. I think that's so. Actually, my kid was like that too, and I will say on that piece, sounds like if he has a passion or interest in that area, I would go for that in other ways as well. In addition to with your IEP team, because I talk a lot about the book about leveraging natural curiosity to actually engage your kids. I mean, kid, you may even go for other opportunities he might have. I don't know what age your kid is, but to be involved with things he loves, even though he needs life skills around telling time. But if he's savvy to those really subtle concepts, then I would figure out other ways through podcasts, through small groups, through kids who are interested in that to involve him in those things on my own.
Okay, one more, because we've been on an hour. That's Stephanie. How do you make the jump from moderate to severe to a mild moderate class setting? I know what I would say about that.
Go ahead.
And again, is in the IEPs, and parents are as guilty of this as are the rest of the IEP team, and that we jump to placement first.
Mm-hmm.
And placement is actually the last decision, or should be the last decision in the IEP process. And that you look at the child's needs, you develop goals based on those needs, and then you say, okay, what does the child need to get to those goals? And then you look at the whole package and what setting is best suited, what placement is best suited to implement that IEP.
Absolutely. I was going to say that if you didn't say it first. It's like the classroom, the placement is a bucket. The bucket, and I don't like those buckets. I actually worked on the early childhood inclusion project for the state of for New York City. And the idea that, that because the kid has this, they need to be here. The kids are so multidimensional. But so by starting with your kid's needs, it's like he should only be in a moderate severe classroom if he has needs that require that. So if you're showing that he's doing the kinds of things that are happening in these other settings, then there's no foregone should never be a foregone conclusion that because of a label or diagnosis, he's automatically in the moderate severe as opposed to the mild moderate. And I think for me, it took showing the teacher in the multiple handicapped preschool, showing in elementary what my kid could do for them to see, hey, this is what he's what he's doing, this is what his needs are. His needs aren't met here. His needs weren't well served in the moderate severe class where he was waiting, where people were talking with telegraphic speech like get ball. I felt he needed rich language, not telegraphic speech, which is fair, and certain kids based on their needs need that, and that's absolutely right, but it didn't fit my kids' needs. And I think that's what Lisa's saying is, how do you make that jump? For me, it was showing teachers and the team that his needs were not a match for that classroom any longer.
We have
oh, sorry, we're over.
No, that's fine. No. Supports and services drive placement. It's not that placement drives services. Services drive placement. And to put that in plainer language, I had a client not too long ago, and I'm still working on drilling this into her head because she's unhappy with her child's placement, with a lot of aspects of her child's placement. And she keeps saying to me, the only reason I wanted him in this placement is because of how many weekly therapy hours he'll get there. And I keep saying to her, if your child needs that many weekly therapy hours, that's what they need. And that's what they should get in their placement. Like, you don't put a child in a placement to get the therapy hours. You get it in the IEP that they need the therapy hours. And then you say, okay, what placement is best suited to implement this many therapy hours in a given week? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, your point on that, though, I know as a parent, you get caught in that because if you have more children, I had 4 children. I thought, same thing happened to me. I thought, hey, if I put him in this self-contained, multiple handicap, they're bringing in the OT, the PT, the speech, all that. You know, it's like a one-stop shop, and we're human too.
Right.
But understanding it exactly what Lisa said, and it caused me to do the same, have to remove him. I said, I'll have to get that therapy other places because it wasn't a match. So I think your example rings true to me. And anytime you go down that path, by letting the placement lead, you're gonna run into problems, and you're gonna run into unhappiness because you're gonna have that match.
Right. But if you envision your child in a certain placement, it's just in your head, you have to define it. What are they doing there that my child needs? And that's usually we can get there. It's just, what are they doing in that placement that your child needs? Why do you like that placement? Because that's what I hear from parents a lot. Well, I like this placement, or I like that classroom, or I like that. Okay, great. But what is it that your child needs that they're doing there that he can't possibly receive in a less restrictive environment?
Absolutely. It's being able to envision that.
All right. Well, let's wrap up. Tell us about your book. Tell us where to find it and all that other fun stuff.
Yeah. I guess I really enjoyed it, and thank you so much, Lisa, for having me on, and just being able to talk from the heart about some of these things. I love the questions. Anybody that was on, I'd like to invite you to my website, which is highexpectationsparenting.com. There's a place there to sign up to pre-order the book. Anybody who signs up from A Day in Our Shoes, from listening from your website, what I'm going to do is grab some names and provide folks with maybe 2 or 3 free books from folks who sign up for my e-parenting tips, which come out regularly. Also, my Facebook page, Capable the Book, tells more about when it'll be released. I'm real happy. I will just end by saying I'm really happy that it is not published yet, but I did just get a endorsement from Gary Chapman, the best-selling author of 5 Love Languages, if you've heard of him or his work. And he's really given me a great endorsement that I hope will catch the attention of publishing houses. So stay tuned for pre-publication and publication announcements. Sign up on my website, highexpectationsparenting.com, and we'll get at least 3 free books out to 3 people who sign up.
Okay, great. And I will have all this information, all the links, her Facebook page, and everything. As you know, I gather it all up and I send it all out. So I will do that today or tomorrow. But other than that, have a great weekend, everyone. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.